Morning, everybody, and happy Rosh Hashanah for those who still join us and those who do not join us because it's recorded today. Hope you're all well, and today also a reminder to all of you that we'll have a break for the next 2 weeks. Which is October 3rd and October 10th. And we resume our class 10th is Columbus Day. And we resume our classes on Monday, October 17th. That being said, today we'll be looking at the political and economic situation in the United Kingdom following the election of Liz Truss to the post of Prime Minister and leader of the ruling Conservative Party, replacing Boris Johnson. If you remember, we looked at the UK just before our summer break, replacing Boris Johnson, who was forced to resign. You remember that after a number of scandals that made it impossible for him to continue leading the country. But before we do that, let's go back for a moment, as usual, to the Ukrainian war and the latest developments surrounding it. You may remember that last Monday, I said that the advance of the Ukrainian troops in the northeast of the country may interfere with Russia's intention to organize referendums there aimed at annexing the two statelets of Donetsk and Luhansk. Now, Michelle, if you could put up, please, map number 1. To organize referendums similar to what the Kremlin had done in Crimea in 2014. You know by now also that those two statelets form the Donbas region, which has been under partial control, military control, of Russian, thank you, Michelle. You see here the two provinces of, the two statelets of Luhansk and Donetsk, which formed the Donbas, and again, which had been under partial control of Russian-backed separatist forces since 2014, and whose independence had been formally recognized by Moscow at the start of this war. Well, it seemed that the ongoing Ukrainian military push in the northeast, instead of dissuading Russian officials from holding referendums at this time, in the middle of the war, encouraged them, on the contrary, to hasten considerably the process while it is still time. As a result, since last Friday, staged popular consultations are being held over 4 days. It should end tonight, in 4 Ukrainian provinces, Donetsk and Luhansk, that you see here in the northeast, which was expected, but also in the regions of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson in the south, which came as a surprise. And Michelle, if you could put up, please, map number 2. Russia's official media went into high gear explaining that the referendums were held at the request of the residents of those regions, of those 4 Ukrainian provinces, to join Russia. Thank you, Michelle. You see here in pink the Zaporizhzhia province, where this largest nuclear plant, Zaporizhzhia, is based, and To the left, on my left, you have the Kherson region, with a city of a port city of Kherson on the Black Sea. So just please keep the map on, Michel, for a little bit longer. So that, again, the media was trying to explain that these referendums were held at the request of the residents there, failing to point out that more than half of this area's population had fled during the fighting and was enabled, obviously, to cast their ballots. While these referendums follow to the letter the pattern of the one held in Crimea 8 years ago, with a single question asked: do you want your region to secede from Ukraine and create an independent state that will enter the Russia Federation? The conditions under which they are held are being quite different from Crimea. For one, unlike Crimea, Russia only partially occupies, as I said, the region of Luhansk and Donetsk. And fighting continues around villages and towns there, forcing the Russian proxy officials to go, in a way, door to door to collect ballots. Second, to give appearance of widespread participation. Again, half the population has fled, and some of the population refuses to take part in this sham type of referendum. It seems that minors ages 13 to 17 have been encouraged to vote, and workers have been threatened with losing their job if they did not. Last Tuesday, Putin himself reaffirmed his support for the referendums. And Dmitry Medvedev, who was Russia's former president and a close ally of Putin, indicated that it was essential to bring back the forced Ukrainian provinces into Russia's federation's fold. Now, you can see here that if these referendums, and there is no doubt about it, show a majority of people in favor of joining the Russian Federation, then you will have a continuum of territory from Luhansk through Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, which effectively cuts off the rest of the Ukrainian territory from, number one, from the Sea of Azov, and number two, it will limit Ukraine's access to the Black Sea, and also take out like 20% of the Ukrainian territory in a mineral-rich area, which is the most industrial developed area of Ukraine. And so it's a continuum of force of four. That's probably what pushed the Russian officials to organize referendums in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, actually. Zaporizhzhia probably because of the nuclear facility here, and Kherson because it's an opening of Russia, of Ukraine rather, on the Black Sea. So strategically, you can tell these four provinces are extremely important to Ukraine. Needless to say, obviously, that the US, NATO, and the EU, and most UN member states gathered in New York on the occasion of the 77th session of the General Assembly, immediately rejected Russia's move, calling the referendums illegal and the votes a sham, and reiterated the refusal to recognize any land grabbing of Ukrainian territory. President Biden announced that further US economic and financial sanctions would be taken against Russia if the annexations, in fact, are carried out. And even China, which, as you know, is aligned with Russia on that issue, as most issues, and the permanent UN Security Council member, called for every effort to be made to find a peaceful solution in Ukraine. But besides the illegal nature of the annexations that reminds the Europeans of the darker days, of the darkest days preceding the breakout of World War II, Putin's move signals a significant hardening of Russia's position. Indeed, by annexing those territories, the Kremlin indicates that it now considers them as part of Russia, and that any further Ukrainian military action there could be perceived as an attack on Russia proper and resisted by any military means, including potentially with Russia's armed arsenal of unconventional weapons, regardless of whether the international community recognizes Russia's territorial claims or not. If the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, Putin said in a televised speech last week, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff, he concluded. Now, such repeated threats, Putin made them before, if you remember, a few months ago, coming from a country with the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world, rekindled debate about how to best respond to Kremlin's headlong rush. At the United Nations, again, President Biden accused again Russia of making irresponsible threats and irresponsible statements, reminding that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. But Putin did not stop there. To show that he means business and is not concerned with the escalation of the conflict, he also announced in the same televised speech the mobilization of hundreds of thousands of additional reservists. The Russian defense minister put that number at 300,000, meant to bolster the Russian military presence on the Ukrainian front or behind it. Putin stopped short of declaring a full national draft, settling for a partial call-up of people with what he said military experience. Furthermore, students would not be called up to fight, and conscripts would not be sent into combat zones. The terms of the mobilization decree, however, have remained deliberately vague, particularly when it came to defining what military experience is, which allows the official a certain flexibility of interpretation. The call-up, however, is mandatory, reservists having to report for duty or face fines and charges. And it has already started, apparently. However, it seems that the mobilization has been mostly active in the remote regions of Russia and among ethnic minorities in particular, in Siberia, which shows that Putin, for the time being, is trying to spare the Russian population. Also, the borders of Russia with neighboring countries stayed open, which allowed a number of Russians, not too many, but a number of young Russians to move to other countries, even though the Baltic states are close to them. The three Baltic states close their border with Russia, not because of this mobilization, but because of Russia's war in Ukraine. And Finland, which is also a neighbor of Russia, has decided to close its border with Russia. So the young people of Russia, a few hundred so far. So this is not a huge exile, or a few hundreds of them left for went to the south, to the Georgian border, and some of them flew to Turkey, where Russian citizens do not need a visa. But overall, there have been some protests across Russia, not strong enough, however, to create a movement of mass civilian disobedience. Now, how effective this call-up remains very much to be seen, for two reasons. First, the conscript need weapons, and Russia's arsenal, as everybody knows, is depleted from all this fighting in the Ukraine. And Russia has been forced recently to start buying weapons from North Korea, of all places. And also, there is a question of training of these new conscripts, which might take months to provide. And again, it was not explained very well by Putin nor the Russian military officials what training means and what military experience means. So that remains to be seen. Not to mention the will to fight that the Ukrainians have in abundance, but the Russian not necessarily, apparently. The morale is not very good. And by bringing in more former civilians into the army does not guarantee the bolster of morale among the in the Russian ranks. Now, for your information, there are an estimated 100 to 120,000 Russian troops in Ukraine, to whom must be added Russian-backed separatist forces, pro-Russian Chechen elements, and members of the Wagner Group, which is a paramilitary organization that reports directly to the Kremlin, bringing the total number of Russian presence, so to speak, to approximately 200,000 in Ukraine. Now, overall, Russia armed forces are estimated at 800,000, with 200,000 more to join early next year. So this is where we stand today. As I mentioned earlier, these referendums in the 4 provinces should be over by tonight. And then depending on the results, but there is no doubt about the outcome of those referendums, an annexation formal date will be set, I think, in the Kremlin, and we'll see what happens 3 weeks from now when we meet again. So now let's move on to the UK. As you might have seen or heard, Liz Truss, prevailed early September over Rishi Sunak, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, in the nomination contest for the post of Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party, becoming Britain's fourth Prime Minister in 6 years and third female leader ever, after Margaret Thatcher and Theresa May. Her victory was widely expected after she took a commanding lead over her rival during the summer campaign by presenting herself to the party members as a hawkish diplomat, a party loyalist, and a free market champion, with a single-minded program of tax cuts and smaller government, which is particularly popular with the Conservative Party, with the Tory party, card holders. In contrast, Rishi Sunak's message, who himself was Chancellor of the Exchequer, appeared less appealing to some of the to a majority, I should say, of the 160,000 party members who cast their ballots. Also, many members of the party, many militants, had not forgiven Sunak for having deserted Boris Johnson by resigning his post during the last summer scandals, prompting a wave of defections in Johnson's cabinet, which sealed the prime minister's political fate. In contrast, Liz Truss did not participate in the Tory rebellion against Johnson and stayed with him to the bitter end. But regardless of their respective programs and degree of loyalty, Truss's nomination as Johnson's successor represents the culmination of a remarkable political journey to the top. Raised in a left-wing family, with a father who was a mathematician and a mother a nurse and a teacher, Truss was an active member, started out her political career as an active member of Britain's centrist party, the Liberal Democrats. As a student at Oxford University, she wrote one day, she called actually for a vote to abolish the monarchy. Ironically, she's supposedly the last person to have seen Queen Elizabeth alive when she traveled to Scotland to present her credentials as Prime Minister just one day before the Queen's demise. Switching to the Tories after she graduated from Oxford, Truss advanced through 6 ministerial posts under 3 Conservative prime ministers: Johnson, then before that Theresa May, and before that David Cameron. And like Cameron, she campaigned against Britain's departure from the European Union in the 2016 referendum campaign. And she only became a fervent supporter of Brexit after the vote. As Prime Minister, Truss's political opportunism will be seriously tested, as she is called to deal with Britain's mounting domestic troubles, which range from a deepening energy crisis and skyrocketing inflation. Energy bills were set to spike by 80% this fall, 80%, to growing backlogs for medical treatment. What's more, recent polls found that almost 2/3 of the British public at large, and I'm not talking here only about the members of the Conservative Party, but the British public opinion at large, lack confidence in the government, and about the same percentage in Liz Truss herself. While popularity is extremely important, as you can imagine, to any politician, particularly one who is relatively unknown and untested, the new prime minister is likely to be judged at the end of the day by her handling of Britain's coming economic storm. With near double-digit inflation deepening a cost of living crisis, a looming recession, possible fuel shortages this winter, and a shaky trade relationship with the European Union, which is Britain's largest partner, the immediate priority for Truss was to announce sweeping measures to shield vulnerable families and reassure businesses that have been teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. With that in mind, Truss announced on Thursday a sweeping plan to freeze gas and electricity rates for 2 years at a cost of tens of billions of pounds to the British Treasury. Under the plan, average annual costs for households would be capped at £2,500, which is around $2,600, even less today. In addition, costs for businesses, charities, and schools would also be capped for 6 months, underscoring the largest government intervention in the economy in decades, even bigger than the emergency measures during the coronavirus pandemic. These measures will save a typical household in Britain around $1,200 a year. The next day, on Friday, in order to boost the economy by lowering taxes, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is roughly the equivalent of Treasury Secretary in the United States, waived the proposed rise in corporate taxation and abolished the top rate of 45% income tax applied to those earnings more or less $170,000 a year. He also cut the basic rate for lower earners and reduced the level of contributions to the National Health Service in Britain. The size of the cuts, estimated at around $72 billion over the next 5 years, underscores the free market and tax-cutting instincts of Liz Truss, who's betting that reducing taxes will encourage more investment and that the benefits will help reboost the economy, allowing her to appeal to voters in 2 years when the next parliamentary elections are supposed to be taking place, to appeal to them to stick with the Conservatives rather than switch to the opposition Labour Party. Now, judging by the first negative reactions from financial markets in Britain, the value of British stocks, bonds, and the pounds dropped. This is a big gamble that she's taking. Indeed, the combination of tax cuts and promises already made to shield households and businesses from the soaring cost of energy will mean more government borrowing. And one of the biggest dangers in that is that investors will shun the plans. That would push the cost of borrowing to highs that would make the debt levels unsustainable. The other risk is that, on the contrary, the measure proved to be insufficient or too late to reverse years of lackluster productivity and business, and the inflation will continue unabated. That being said, the domestic concerns, however serious, will not prevent a mistrust from addressing head-on the pressing foreign policy issues that she has been dealing with for the past couple of years as Boris Johnson foreign secretary. Especially that now in her new role as prime minister, she has the opportunity to flesh out the vision of a global Britain that her predecessor unveiled after the UK left the European Union 2 years ago. A global Britain which, at the same time, having cast itself off from the EU, can act more like a free agent, if you will, seeking its own relations with partners worldwide. But also, on the other hand, a global Britain that, having lost its role as a bridge between the United States and Europe, is becoming a less influential player on the international stage. Now, given Truss's track record over the past couple of years, most observers predict a certain cooling of relations between the UK and the US, and even more so with the rest of Europe. Indeed, for all his Brexit bluster, which appealed to former President Trump, but irritated Joe Biden, Johnson, born in New York City and US citizens up to 2016, regularly expressed his affinity for the United States. So much so that in his last appearance as prime minister in the House of Commons in July, he offered his successor some parting advice, borrowed from his hero, Winston Churchill, by saying, "Stay close to the Americans." Mrs. Truss, by contrast, shows little reverence for the so-called special relations between Britain and the US. "It is special, but not exclusive," she said at the party conference last year, noting that Britain had other important allies like Australia, India, and European countries, notably the Baltic states. Truss's most ambitious outreach to Washington came during the Trump years and ended in frustration. At the time, she was Trade Secretary, and she led the negotiations for a transatlantic trade agreement, which lost momentum when Trump lost the elections in 2020, and with Biden's very little interest in reviving them. Perhaps stung by this experience, Truss has steered clear of American politics ever since, merely saying that, and I quote, "We have to work with whoever is in the White House." Last week, on her way to the UN General Assembly in New York, she told reporters that Britain no longer expected to negotiate a trade deal with the US in the short to medium term, a fact which was obvious to all, given the opposition to such deals in the Congress at this time, but a development that was welcomed in a way by the British government that sees the suspension of negotiations as an opportunity to remove whatever leverage the Biden administration has in pressuring Britain to resolve a dispute with the European Union over trade in Northern Ireland. So indeed, with the transatlantic now a deal no longer on the table, Truss is expected to take a harder line in negotiation with Brussels over the Brexit trade arrangement in Northern Ireland. I'll come back to that in a moment. That being said, on a number of important issues, such as Iran's nuclear program and the war in Ukraine, Truss will continue Johnson's policy of supporting the US. And in the case of Ukraine, calling even for harsher sanctions on Russia and increased armed deliveries to Ukraine, using language that at times go even further than that of American officials. But while the UK-US relations might experience ebbs and flows, the tensions between London and Brussels have already flared over legislation introduced a few months ago by Truss in her capacity as Foreign Secretary that would upend the post-Brexit trade arrangement in Northern Ireland. Michel, if you could put up, please, map number 3. This trade arrangement with the EU is known as the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is part of the Brexit withdrawal agreement between the two parties. Just a reminder, we've been through that many times before when we discussed the Brexit process. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom and shares an open land border with the Republic of Ireland, an independent nation that is member of the European Union. I don't know if you heard me, Michel. Please, could you put up map number 3? Now, before Brexit, it was easy to transport goods across that border between the two islands. Thank you. Here we are. You see Northern Ireland, which is made up of 6 counties, I think, and the rest is in yellow, pale yellow. It's the Republic of Ireland. Now, before Brexit, again, it was easy to transport goods across this border because both sides had the same EU rules, obviously. After Brexit, however, when the UK and Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, pulled out, a new system was needed because the EU has strict food rules and requires border checks when certain goods like meat, milk, eggs arrive from non-EU countries, which was the case now of Great Britain, thus Northern Ireland. So you may also remember that the Irish border was a very irrespective now of the European Union and its arrangements with Great Britain. This issue of the Irish border is a very sensitive issue because of Northern Ireland's troubled political history. You may remember the troubles and almost a civil war in Northern Ireland, and you remember also the Irish Republican Army, which was a military arm of the separatist forces in Northern Ireland, the Catholic forces in Northern Ireland, fighting the British in Northern Ireland. So that issue of the border between the two islands was effectively addressed in 1999 with the so-called Good Friday Agreement, which basically put an end to the fighting in Northern Ireland I won't go into details now because this is not really our subject, but suffice to say that it put an end to the fighting in the north, and kept, more importantly, and relevant to our discussion, kept the border between the two islands open to people and goods. Now, with that in mind, the EU and the UK, when the UK pulled out of the European Union, they came up, both sides, with a special arrangement to keep the Irish land border open, even though Northern Ireland was no longer part of the EU. Now, that arrangement stipulates that Northern Ireland would continue following EU rules on product standards, and that any inspections and document checks would take place instead of the border, would take place at Northern Ireland ports in the Irish Sea. Now, this arrangement worked relatively well since Brexit. Now, about 6 months ago, Ms. Truss, as Foreign Secretary at the time, again, introduced a legislation that would effectively scrap this ingenious mechanism on the ground that Democratic Unionist Party, which is the main pro-unionist party in Northern Ireland, close to Britain, refuses to take part in a power-sharing government with the Sinn Féin party, which is the largest party in the Northern Ireland, which is Catholic, unless Britain reviews the terms of the arrangement with the EU, arguing that placing an effective border in the Irish Sea undermines Northern Ireland's place within the UK. Brussels' response was not long in coming, with the EU Commission threatening retaliatory measures that might trigger a full-fledged trade war that nobody really wants. Also, the Biden administration has kept close watch, anxious that the dispute could threaten a quarter century of peace in Northern Ireland. And on a more personal basis, Biden himself, who makes much of his Irish heritage, has been following closely that issue. Fortunately, this legislation, Mrs. Truss's legislation, could drag on for months, given the fierce resistance this bill is likely to face in the House of Lords, particularly, where many members view it as a breach of international law, which it is in a way. After all, Britain signed on this arrangement. The dilemma for Ms. Truss is that her recent political ascent has been defined by her closeness to the Conservative Party's Brexiteer wing, which makes it harder for her to give ground in the dispute with the EU. So we'll see, we'll be following closely also what is going on there. But she will have a very, very tough task to fill, Ms. Truss. There are so many issues in England, particularly economic and financial, that she's basically gambling her whole political career on her, first of all, on the domestic success of her tax cutting program, but also on this Northern Ireland issue that resurfaced again only 2 years after signing the painfully set arrangements with European Union. So we'll see. All right. So now I open the floor to questions, comments, or anything else that you might have.
Pierre, you fiend.
Hi.
How are you faring today?
All right. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. This mobilization is a colossal blunder. This really is. And it in so many levels. I mean, you've heard that he's offering pardons to Russian criminals if they go and they fight in the war. That he's offering Russian citizenship to foreigners who are willing.
Yeah, I
to come
saw
in.
that.
Yeah,
but that follows a little bit his policy of trying to spare the Russian citizens, so to speak, from this mobilization. So he's giving for a foreign Russian citizen, although I don't know who in Europe or elsewhere would want Russian citizens. I don't think this is a huge incentive for foreigners unless you're desperate to become a Russian citizen. That's number one. And number two, probably you saw that since you seem to be well informed on this mobilization issue, is that this mobilization is really very active among the ethnic minorities in Russia. Again, in Chechnya, obviously, but Chechnya has been the first one to already voluntarily send troops to Ukraine. But also in the Far East, around Vladivostok, Novosibirsk, and Siberia in general, among the Mongolian minorities. There, apparently, the mobilization is conducted full strength. So, and they admitted also having made some mistakes in calling up people who are not supposed to be called up, like older people and some students who are supposed to be exempt for the draft. The response to the draft also, as you've seen, has been relatively moderate. There have been some demonstration, indeed, but by and large, these demonstrations have been conducted not so much against the draft per se, but because mistakes and errors have been made. So people have been called who were not supposed to be called, and those were the most vocal, if you will. There have been a few demonstrations. There have been a few hundreds arrests. But again, for a country of 180 million people, it's been relatively contained for now. So we're going to see what happens yet. If indeed it's a blunder, probably, but at the same time, I think it was needed because they don't have enough. They realize that, again, the idea was to change the government in Kiev and get out in a few days. And 7 months later, that's far from happening. So he needs more people. First of all, not necessarily in the combat zones, but just to administer the annexed regions, if that happens anytime soon, to bolster and to back up the Russian-backed officials already there. They'll need more Russians to work in the administration over there in those 4 provinces. So it doesn't mean that these people will be all sent to to the battlefield. A few who had real military experience will do, because obviously you don't want to send people to the battlefield who have very little experience, and that also might need a little bit of time. So it will not happen overnight. It might take a little bit of time, and knowing the Russian bureaucracy, it will take longer rather than a shorter period of time for this to really have a full impact on the war. But again, we'll see.
I'm sure those ethnic groups that they're grabbing these conscripts out of are going to be overjoyed to go out and fight for Mother Russia under these circumstances. I mean, and you touched on it as well with what we discussed last week, is the idea of morale. The morale of the troops.
Absolutely.
It's why we fight. It's what we fight for. It's selling this war, and they're attacking a common people with a common history, where there was no reason to have this invasion, and now they're going to be. The regular army was performing poorly and had its morale in the tank. Now they're going to be taking these conscripts.
But that's exactly the point. Is that bringing in civilians among troops, professional soldiers who already don't have much of an incentive to fight. That might prove catastrophic, because these people, their first question is, if I'm called up, and if our regular army is not capable of taking care of the business, how could we? Can we be expected to be fighting efficiently enough to hold up the professional troops? And dying here makes absolutely no sense for us. So even those who are not students and who do not have, if you will, a political awareness of what's going on, or some of them might be willing to fight for Mother Russia, indeed, because they can come from an environment where they are, less educated and don't know much about what's going on. But indeed, the first question is on a personal basis. If the army could not take care of this special operation, which is not a war in the Ukraine, how can we be expected to help out? We don't know much about the military in the first place. So the morale of these people sent to behind the battlefield, I think behind the front, but even so, to help out is not exactly, would not help much, logistically speaking. So whether he was forced to do that, again, in order to spare the Russian population for a full draft, which indeed would have been recognizing that his special operation has failed in a way. We'll see what happens, and again, what the response of the public opinion in Russia will be. For so far, it's been relatively quiet, but we'll see.
Pierre?
Yes.
Go ahead. I'm going to Britain now. Do you have a sense of, well, first of all,
excuse me, I'll interrupt you. Just the first, when are you going?
Who?
When are you going to Britain?
Oh, I'm not going to Britain. I'm just.
I'm not going to. Oh no, sorry. I understood that you're going to Britain because
no.
I'm going to say.
I'm just wondering.
It's a good time to go to Britain because the pound has plummeted so much that today it's the dollar goes much further in Britain than even 3. It was 1.3 for you got for a pound. It was $1.3. Today it's reaching almost parity. It's
Wow.
down to almost, just to show you how much the pound has lost of
Yeah, I
its
thought
value.
it was. I
So
thought
it's
it
a
was
great time
parallel.
for Americans to travel to Britain. That's what I meant to say. But if you're not going,
Yeah. But I'm just wondering if you have any sense of the feeling of the British public toward Truss, and if you have any speculation about whether she will last out her term. Is her term 4 years?
her term, no, her term is two more years, because Johnson had already he had to he won
That's
the
right, he
election
quit in the
when,
middle.
yeah, he won the election in when did he, last year was that he won the elections. So she will have to fill out the term of Johnson. And
Okay.
the next elections, I think, are supposed to be taking place in 2024 in England. So that's a very good question, and that's something that nobody can tell. It depends how the markets will respond to this sweeping reform. Because up to now, the Conservative Party was very careful, unlike the EU, to get into this spending spree based on borrowing money, because there is no money in the coffers of the British bank, central bank. So they'll have to borrow money. And if the financial markets do not believe that her plan is sustainable, or they might not, there will be no investors lending money to the treasury. And then in that case, in order to attract money, the Bank of England will have to raise the rates. So you get more money. Obviously, it's an incentive to loan money. But when you raise the rates, you have to pay back the debt, will be much higher. And if this goes on with rates going up, and then you have to, at some point, to start reimbursing the investors. And if the investors just plainly do not believe that you can pay them back, they stop lending money. And if they stop lending money, the country is bankrupt. So this is a huge. She believes that there will be enough money put into the economy by capping the energy prices, and for the next couple of years, that the economy by itself and with the investment, with the economy in England will restart.
She's also doing that trickle down, right? She's the trickle down theory.
And then it will go back to normal. That's much too early to tell. All these decisions were made last week and announced, made public last week. The first reaction, as I said in my presentation, has been very pessimistic. In other words, the pound, the stocks and bonds in England today, this morning, went down. The value of the pound plummeted to rates not seen since 1980s, almost parity between the dollar and the pound. So it remains to be seen what is said, if there is enough trust, so to speak. Polls just conducted before the announcement of this new plan showed that a majority of the British public opinion did not trust the government. And the same number of people, as I said also, do not trust, particularly Liz Truss herself. Because you have to understand, she was not elected like Johnson during normal elections where all the British voters participated. In this particular case, since the Conservative Party has a majority in the House of Commons in England, only the Conservative card holders were called to elect their leader, and thus the leader of the party, as you know, in England, becomes automatically the prime minister. So Truss does not have the trust of the British public opinion, which knows her little because, okay, she was minister in a number of governments previously, as I said, but first a junior minister, more recently a senior minister, but still a foreign minister in the country is someone who deals with foreign affairs, not with domestic affairs. Her rival, Rishi Sunak, is much better known in England because he was a minister of treasury in England. So he and most British had a very good opinion of him. But again, it's not the British voters at large who voted. It's only the members of the Conservative Party, militants who are much more to the right even that the Conservative lawmakers in the British Parliament. So that's an issue for her. In addition to not having experience in economics, she doesn't have much. I mean, she was a minister on a number of issues, but never on the economy. So she has, unlike her rival again, who will be breathing down her neck actually by saying, if this doesn't work out, you can expect Rishi Sunak to come back in a year or 6 months from now and to say, you see, all the promises she made, and I wouldn't have done so this way, but she was reckless with the economy. This plan failed, and now what? So she might be replaced 6 months from now by the Conservative Party if they don't like her. Or don't like her. That's not the point. But if they believe that her policies are not working out in England, they'll try to save their seats, the lawmakers in the parliament, Conservative lawmakers, by getting rid of her and getting Rishi Sunak back just before the elections in England, so that the voters at large will stay with the Conservative Party instead of joining the Labour Party. So we'll see. But to answer your question, to make it shorter, it's up to how the markets will react to her plan. She could be out in 6 months from now, as she could be, if she's successful, then she will stay, and then probably re-elected in.
But you said the Conservative Party named her as a replacement for Boris, right? Yeah.
Well,
so if she's out in 6 months, won't the Conservative Party still be in power to put in somebody else?
Yes. They'll be in power no matter what.
Yeah.
Till the very end of this mandature,
Of the term.
till 2024. Because the elections were held, and during those elections, Johnson won by a large margin. So they have a large majority in the parliament. So no matter what happens to the leader of the party, in this case, Liz Truss, no matter what happens to her, this is an internal issue for the Conservative Party as a whole to take care of who their leader is.
Yeah.
They can get rid of her tomorrow by a vote of non-confidence in the parliament, as they can keep her on for a while. That does not affect who's in power. The Conservative Party will stay for as long as till 2024, till the next elections, and will try, obviously, to do its best before the next elections, because again, the danger is that they lose their majority in the next election. But until the next election, the Conservative Party stays.
Right.
Speaking of, I'd just like to make a comment about Northern Ireland, which I found extremely interesting. As you know, roughly speaking, the Republic of Ireland, which is independent, has a majority of Catholics. They are mostly in the south of the island. So that has always been the case, which even, if you will, intensified when the partition of the two islands happened back in 1921, I think 1921. Northern Ireland had up to now a majority, the population of it was mostly Protestant Anglican. They were close to the British with the Unionist parties. The Unionist party is the one in favor of union, to stay in the union with Britain, I would say, not Great Britain, because Great Britain includes Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So in the latest census in Northern Ireland, it turns out that for the first time, there is a majority of the population which is Catholic. So that might have, I'm not saying that in 2022, the religion aspect will have a fundamental impact on politics. Nonetheless, the fact that today, again, for the first time, you have a population which is in majority Catholic, might have some impact on the will eventually of reunification of the two parts of the island to become only one. That remains to be much to be seen. The leading party today, because in this Good Friday Agreement, which was signed in 1999 between the Catholic and Protestant communities in Northern Ireland, as well as the British and the Irish at the time, there was a provision calling for power sharing in the government in Belfast. In other words, there is no government where the two communities, if you will, are not represented. One community cannot represent by itself the whole population of Northern Ireland. So after the last election, the Sinn Féin, which is a political arm of the Catholic community, came out on top. So they form a majority in the government today in Northern Ireland. However, the Unionist Party, which is the Democratic Union Party in Northern Ireland, formed mostly of people who want to stay in the UK. They refused to participate in power sharing, in this power sharing arrangement, as long as there is a sort of border in the Irish Sea between them and the UK. That is why Northern Ireland today has no government at all, because they refuse, they boycott the government as long as the UK doesn't change the rules towards the European Union, the arrangement that has been signed 2 years ago. That is why Truss introduced this legislation in the British Parliament. So creating a huge standoff with the European Union on that issue. The European Union is furious, saying, you have signed on it. Now, we cannot let you get away with it because there are rules. I mean, we cannot let you send goods and it doesn't concern people, okay? The people can move back and forth between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland freely. But as far as the goods are concerned, they are saying, the European Union member states are saying, we have our rules and regulations. You pulled out of Brexit. You don't want to comply with those rules and regulations, but yet at the same time, you don't want to check. You want to bring in merchandise from you, Britain, to Northern Ireland, which should follow the EU regulation without any freely. So you cannot have it both ways. You cannot be out of the European Union and at the same time do not respect our rules and regulations. So that's where we are standing today on Northern Ireland. So we're going to see what happens. But this all, I found it was a very interesting detail about the demographic changes in Northern Ireland. Because again, in that arrangement of Good Friday agreement, there is a provision which allows Northern Ireland to hold a referendum. It's not mentioned at what time and how and when, but there is provision there, basically saying that at one point, Northern Ireland could organize a referendum on whether to join the Republic of Ireland or not. So this is another issue. At some point, they might vote on this, which in a way will speed up also the Scottish claims, for independence. So that we'll see. Whether it will be done in the next few years or not, we'll see. But obviously, the political parties in Northern Ireland, which are favorable to a reunification with the Republic of Ireland, will be following this very, very closely to see what the trend is and what the public opinion believes in Northern Ireland, which might lead again to trouble, because obviously there is a segment of the population in Northern Ireland that refuses categorically to join the Republic of Ireland. They want to stay within the United Kingdom. So we'll see what happens there. Do you have any comments also? It's not our subject today, but we'll be looking at it after our break, about what happened yesterday in Italy. Now, some of you must be wondering what happened yesterday in Italy. Well, there were parliamentary elections in Italy, and for the first time, the right wing won the election. A coalition of right and far right parties won the elections. So that's might be an additional issue for the European Union to worry about. That comes after the victory of the Swedish right-wing coalition over there. So two elections in two EU member states with majorities now of right-wing parties, they might be an indication that the European Union is weakening, and that the people in the European Union, although most people in Europe are in favor of Europe, but not at the expense, if you will, on giving up the national independence on many issues. They don't want to be told by Brussels what to do, how to think, and how, generally speaking, on political issue. So that might be also a problem for in the years to come. For the two countries which are in favor of more Europe, like France and Germany, they might face a stronger opposition in addition to Hungary and Poland. They might now having start to face stronger opposition for countries which are much more important, I would say, to the European Union, like Sweden and Italy, particularly Italy. So there, we'll see what's going to happen over there, but it's an interesting development.
My fear is that so many of the countries are going towards European as well as the extent in our country going right wing. And to me, that's really anti-democratic, to say the least. They are xenophobic. There are so many things about I look at them as pro-fascist, if not fascist.
I would say the term is too strong. I mean, fascism is used very easily nowadays. No, I don't believe that they are fascist. They are conservative. They are right-wing. I wouldn't say xenophobic. I would say patriotic. Okay, I would modify the terms a little bit. I wouldn't go that far. But that also shows the failure of the politics of the European Union. It's not only people turn right, you're right. Europe is more conservative today, by and large, than it used to be. But again, you have to wonder why. I mean, it doesn't come out of the blue. It's because of failure of different so-called centrist or socialist parties in most of these countries, and of the European Union per se. Again, the people in Europe look at the European Union as something which dictates them in a way what to do and how to behave. And it's not a government for which, in the United States, you might not like your government, but you voted for it or you voted against it. But you have a government in the United States, for the better, for the worse. But you have a government for which, again, there is a voting process, okay? Well, in Europe, people only vote for the European Union Parliament. They do not vote for the European Union Commission, which is, if you will, the government of the European Union. Those are not elected people. The voters have never voted in the 27 member states of the European Union. They never voted for these people. They were appointed by the government. So for the people in the European Union, they are saying not only we are being told what to do by the European Union, but Commission, but we are told what to do by people who have no mandate, basically, to tell us what to do. They are not, we didn't vote for them. They were appointed. So we had nothing to do with these people. What right do they have to tell us how to behave or what to do or what position to adopt? And this is a huge, they're saying we all want Europe, but up to a point. We don't want Europe, the European Union, to infringe on our sovereignty, okay? That's number one. That's where the problem is. I think the European Union went too fast and was much too ambitious in its ways. That's number one. And number two, the nationalistic, if you will, patriotic feeling that is increasing in the European countries is basically because of the refugee issue in Europe. When, again, it started back in 2015. with the arrival of 1 million people from Syria, basically, yeah, when in a way, Angela Merkel, in my eyes, she's the one who created this crisis, which has been ongoing, because this growing immigration never stopped. It started back in 2014, and then it's been going on now for years, with a huge number of people arriving from other continents, different cultures. The first one had not been absorbed properly. That's another thing. There was not enough jobs to absorb so many people coming to Europe so fast. It was not a controlled immigration, if you will. It was wild. From one day to next, flows of people came into, with no, again, with no training, with different culture, and it was impossible for all these European countries to integrate them and to assimilate them. It takes time. Switzerland also, which is not a member of the European Union, but it's close to the European Union, its policy for many years in terms of immigration has been just as, compared to the number of population in Switzerland, has been just as active as in the European Union. But the difference, the huge difference, is that it has been controlled. So they would let in a quota, they have quotas. They would let in a number of people and they would stop. And those number of people, they made sure that those people were integrated in the Swiss way of life before admitting, again, a number of people. So this is a way to conduct an immigration if you need people in your country. Not to let everybody in and just say, you can do whatever you want, it's your country from now on. That's a huge failure of the European Union. And they still have not resolved that issue. It's still
the problems were the wars there. The problems were not that the people necessarily wanted to leave Syria or leave the other countries. It was a problem of the wars and the genocides that have been occurring.
Yes, but today, to give you an example, that is not true any longer. There is no war in Syria. So the people who came from Syria, for instance, I give you an example, could very well, after a number of years, there is no more war in Syria, but they don't like the regime, the Syrian regime. Well, you cannot do that. I mean, the war is over, per se. And for the past couple of years or 3 years, there haven't been people coming from areas where there is war. There is no more war in Syria. There is no more war in Libya. There is no more war in the sub-Saharan countries. They are coming for economic reasons. They are saying we basically cannot make a living in our country, so we come to Europe where it's easier. Sometimes they have already families who are in Europe, sometimes they don't, and they take a risk by crossing the ocean or crossing the sea and coming to Europe. They are economic refugees. They are no longer people who come from war areas. And again, in Syria in particular, because you mentioned Syria, there is no more war. The war is over, has been over now for 1.5 years, 2 years. And in Europe, anyway, there was no movement in Europe of Syrian refugees who want to go back. And there are several million of them. What Turkey does, for instance, which has 3 million Syrian refugees, slowly but surely, he sends them back to Syria. But this is unsustainable. And what I'm trying to say is that the people who lived there before, I mean, the French or Italian or Swedes, or they cannot take it anymore. So since the European Union is still pushing it for such a policy, they vote against it. And this is where you get the right-wing, the populist government in power, who promise not to send them back necessarily, but to stop this uncontrolled immigration over the borders in Europe.
Pierre,
Yes.
could you explain the difference between the European Parliament, which is elected by the member countries, and the Commission? The
Commission is the executive arm, if you will, of the European Parliament. They make the decision on which the European Parliament votes. To make it to oversimplify it, basically. But the decisions are not made in the Parliament. The decisions are made by the Commission.
So what's the purpose of the Parliament in the election that they do every June?
Well, they can express, if you will, different opinions from the Commission. But generally speaking, there is a majority in the Parliament that votes basically with whatever the Commission decides. Not much. They don't have much power. And not only that, but there is an underrepresentation in the Parliament of the right-wing parties and the overrepresentation of the so-called progressive parties in the Parliament. So that too is askew a little bit. This doesn't work. It doesn't work. That they've been called now to reform the whole structure of the European Union, because they're turning it now into a federal state in a way, a little bit like the United States. Mm-hmm. And that was not the purpose at the beginning. The purpose, as you know, the first type of European Union was started with 6 member states.
Right.
And it was all in the 50s. It was all about economy, okay? And that started to be extended to other countries in Europe. And obviously, when the Soviet Union imploded, then they took in the Eastern European countries. So now you have 27 countries, with the UK having left. You have 27 countries in Europe who do not see anything eye to eye, or most of them eye to eye. As I told you from the beginning, this type of this sense of founded unity over the Ukrainian war was there emotionally at the beginning. Okay, nowadays you can see the cracks.
Right.
As I mentioned that when
the French and the German
it broke out, because in the media it was, oh, you see now the European Union is united, they're working together. NATO, yes, was strengthened, but the European Union was not. As I said from the very beginning, different countries have different approaches to Russia. And a number of countries, small Hungary and Poland in particular, were not, they participated in the sanctions, and Poland even more than any other country, because Poland is close to Russia, and they were afraid that they would be the first one to be targeted by Putin. But Hungary was not, and nowadays you have Sweden, which has just voted in NATO, and Italy, which is one of the major European Union member states, with people who expressed in the past, not now. Okay, now they are all in favor of helping Ukraine, continuing to help Ukraine out. But in the past, they expressed their admiration for Putin. But let's not also forget that in the 90s, everybody was trying to be a friend of Putin. Now these people who are on the right are being accused of having big friends of Putin. But in the 90s, everybody was flirting with Putin, or when he took over in 2000. Everybody wanted to be a friend of Russia. It's not only these people, but all the democracies were trying to have good relations with Russia. It became, at the time, it was very fashionable to be a friend of Russia. Nowadays, obviously not. But different countries have different national interests. And they don't want, including some governments now, they don't want to be told by the European Union what to do and how to behave. Because it's very often it goes against their own national interests. Just to give you the latest example, France is lucky enough to have a very important nuclear powered energy, unlike Germany. Germany gave up on nuclear plants because of the environmental, the Green Party pressure in Germany. So they gave up on it altogether. Only relying on the Russian gas and oil imports. So for the longest time, Germany was getting the Russian oil and gas, being dependent up to 80% on what it got for Russia. And Angela Merkel had very good relations with Putin. France, on the other hand, depended more on its own nuclear powered energy, and they depended on Russia's imports only up to 25%. So today, France finds itself in a much better position, obviously, than Germany, which from one day to next had to cut off or had to sanction their imports of oil because of the EU imposed sanctions on Russia. So what happens today? France now has to help out Germany. I mean, France has almost enough to go through the winter in terms of gas and oil. But instead of doing that, France will be giving nuclear powered energy to Germany, which has none, in the name of the solidarity of the European Union, which will force France to import at a much higher cost liquid gas from the United States, for instance, because it doesn't have enough gas for its own consumption. Now, is that normal? I mean, it's in the name of the solidarity, again, between the two member states of the European Union. They give these valuable stocks of energy to the Germans, and they don't have enough for themselves. So this is just one example among many examples of policies that makes absolutely no sense for the European public opinion.
I can understand that.
Okay, so this is just to give you one example.
Okay.
So this whole idea of European Union being unified and united, not only on Ukraine, but on anything, is totally false. That has been carried by the media in general, but actually, when you look at the facts, it's false. There is no unity. Some sanctions are being imposed, but they are imposed sort of forcefully on the member states themselves. I know what I'm saying is not politically correct, but
No,
okay, but that's a fact.
I believe you. I just,
The fact.
I'm trying to understand.
No,
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But you won't see much of that in the media. The media is all out for pushing the official
Official line.
yeah. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. Anything else?
Yeah, are you going to be here next 2 weeks, or are you taking vacation?
No, I don't know. You're not in at the beginning of, I don't know, when I started out. No, we will not have classes next Monday, nor the following one is Columbus Day, so there would be no classes anyway.
Okay.
But just next Monday, I will not hold our class. So we convene again on the 17th.
Okay. Thank you.
By that time, we'll have
We'll have some answers,
clearer
hopefully.
picture of how this annexation thing will be conducted in Russia, whether this annexation will have taken place by then. Based on what you can see nowadays, it was announced on last Tuesday, and
Right.
it started 3 days later. So in a way, I suppose that the announcement was made only last Tuesday, but I think the Russian authorities have been working on this for a little while to be able to start, to implement it only 3 days later. And also because I think that, again, with the Ukrainian military advances in the northeast, the thinking in the Kremlin, I believe, or among Putin's inner circle, is that let's do it now while it's still time, because we don't,
We don't know what's going to
well,
happen.
you don't know if they're going to break through and retake some of the territories which we are holding now. So while we're holding them, let's organize these referendums, even though, again, the Luhansk province is almost 100% under Russian control, okay? However, the Donetsk region is not. There are still a number of large cities in Donetsk which are under Ukrainian control. So even the claim that you organize referendums are false. I mean, you organize referendums, but only in some areas which are under your control. In the Ukrainian part, you cannot organize them. So, for instance, the Donetsk region, which will be eventually annexed, it will not be the whole Donetsk region.
No, at all.
It is a part of the one which, and who knows what's going to happen in that area if the Ukrainians break through.
This is the second time Russia has tried this in the Luhansk and Donetsk area. And
referendums, you mean?
Referendums. And I was there and I watched them try to do it. And they tried to negotiate with what part would be the Russian part and what part would be the Ukrainian part. Mm-hmm. And it was an utter failure.
Well, that's why this time they don't even try to negotiate, because for the Ukrainians, there is nothing to negotiate.
No, they don't want the Russians at all.
That's where I think that Putin committed a huge political blunder. Something could have been negotiated without this war. I'm convinced that some of the Luhansk and Donetsk region could have been negotiated with Zelensky before the war.
You're right.
Because Zelensky himself, I remember very well, making statements to the effect that he was open to some kind of independence, a level of independence in other words, he was open to, while the Ukrainian administration will still function in those two regions, those two regions would be given a say
Special status
in the
in the
in terms of
Constitution.
how whether Ukraine should join NATO or whether have a say in what the central government in Kiev has to say. That could have been negotiated before the war.
I
Obviously,
agree.
nowadays, the position have hardened on both sides, and Zelensky says, rightly so, we won't negotiate. He
Right.
will negotiate only if he loses the war, which does not seem likely at this time. Okay, so he will say, first, we take everything back. Not only that, the Donetsk region, but we want Crimea back also, which is unrealistic between you and me because
If he gets Donetsk on the hands, that's enough.
Crimea is gone.
Is gone.
That being said, I think he would definitely, towards his own public opinion also, if he could get back whatever the Russians took from him in 2014, he would be he would be a hero
Right.
of Ukraine, and he would be happy with that. With Crimea, it's a different story. Obviously, he would like to have back Crimea, but that's unrealistic. But Putin cannot do that. Towards his own public opinion, he's in a situation where he cannot pull out without anything. If he cannot save face, there is no way Putin can. What worries me a little bit is that Putin is never so dangerous as when he's cornered.
Oh, yeah.
So this is where I don't know what to expect from Putin next. You cannot tell what his reaction is if he has a feeling that he's losing.
I'm sure he has that feeling.
That worries me in a way.
Absolutely.
He'll never be as dangerous as than when he's cornered.
Absolutely.
He will have to do something because then otherwise he will be in a danger of being overthrown by his inner circle.
Right.
If they are losing, they'll say we cannot continue like this unless we're using unconventional weapons, and then God help us all. And he might be tempted to go there if he's losing, really he's losing. What he's trying to do again, this war of attrition in a way, is convenient. He doesn't have to make any decision. Towards his own public opinion, he keeps Ukraine under pressure. He keeps himself under pressure also, but as long as there is this war being conducted there, but without any serious repercussion, even though the mobilization took place, serious repercussion for Russia. And if, economically speaking, Russia can continue to function normally, he will continue with this.
Especially after the winter.
Especially, he wants to buy himself 6 months.
Some time, right, after the winter.
October, November, December, January, February, March.
He's got the winter.
During the winter when there is no way to either side can. That's why the Ukrainians are pushing in the northeast, because they want to take over as much territory as they can before October, before the winter sets in, and then it becomes impossible to.
It's muddy and cold.
It's important, and snowfall. It's impossible to do anything on. So they'll dig in on both sides and wait for the winter to be over. But if Putin loses, then he might be dangerous. Then he might be really dangerous. But again, we'll have to wait and see.
It puts the Ukrainians in a bizarre balancing act, because on the one hand, they want to defeat Putin, but on the other hand, if they defeat him too badly, and it's possible, considering how poorly the Russian army is functioning now, if it's too bad a defeat, then Putin might decide to utilize the equivalent of tactical.
You're right. They know that as well. And Biden knows that as well. And this explains the reluctance of the United States to send Zelensky even more sophisticated weapons, because Zelensky has been asking for it.
Yeah.
On the one hand, Zelensky has been asking for it. On the other hand, he's been praying that the US does not deliver those arms to him, because he would have to use them with consequences that he doesn't. I mean, he knows perfectly well that Putin is capable what Putin is capable
Craziness.
of. So he too, there is a limit of how far the Ukrainians might go. Obviously, the official stand will go as far as we can, and we defeat the Russian enemy and push them back into Russia. That's the official line. In fact, I think that they are very happy to take back some of the territories, but maybe not too much, and maybe are very careful not to hit Russian territory itself, like Belgorod across
the border.
Already targeted already, and some military facilities, Russian military facilities in Crimea, which have also been targeted by them. And that is why he's trying, but at the same time, he's trying to take back as much territory as possible, because once they are annexed and Putin considers them to be, as he said, as part of Russia, if he continues taking over territories over there and bombs them, you don't know what Putin's reaction will be. He will say probably, they're attacking Russia, motherland. So I warn you that I'll be using any means to defend myself, including unconventional weapons. So again, at that point, I leave it open. I mean, and that worries everybody. I mean, it's not only. So we'll see.
But even a tyrannical strongman like Putin, there are limits to what a person can do. I'm thinking if he goes crazy and says, "All right, I'm just gonna nuke Ukraine," there are other people there. I mean, it's not like he just presses a button and the nukes fly. He can give the orders, but is it possible that he would be overthrown? That people in the control structure, people within Russia itself, the Russian military, the Russian system there would say, well, we're not going to go with this. This is a war of your own ego. It's a war of your own doing. At this point, we realize there's probably discussions going on right now in terms of that if he decides to put us in this position.
That's a distinct possibility indeed. I don't believe that he would nuke Ukraine per se, but he would use what they call a strategic nuclear weapon that might kill 10,000 people, but on
a small scale.
Yes, a small limited area. But again, then he brings the conflict to a different level.
Where is that nuclear power plant that the Russians took over?
In one of the provinces that he wants to annex. Yeah, in Zaporozhye.
Zaporozhye.
He might have a strange solution to this problem there, because they're actually using the nuclear power plant, the Russians, to stop ammunition. Do you believe that?
Stranger, it's a hybrid arrangement. They are occupying it, but now they are not running it. The Ukrainians are running it.
They I'm not sure if it's that location, but they were taking satellite photos and they were showing that they were actually stockpiling ammunition, tactical ammunition, in a nuclear power plant.
I don't know.
Which would be so insane, especially considering their lax safety protocols. Maybe in 2 weeks, the solution to the Ukrainian problem will just be a giant hole sitting there.
I don't know.
It's madness, the whole thing.
I don't know what's there and how much of it can be used by the Russians, but I do know that they want to annex it. It's the largest nuclear plant in all of Europe. So definitely it's a huge gain for the Russians if that happens. Not to mention that it's being bombed here and there, 20 kilometers from the facility. While everybody says, let's be very careful. And with all these inspectors of the United Nations Nuclear Energy Agency coming to inspect it, they even left behind a couple of them, just experts to make sure that, I don't know, to make sure what, that the plant functions normally for the time being. An accident is possible.
Especially if they're storing.
With all this fighting, with all the fighting going around. So that's another thing to worry about. All right. Well, I don't want you to worry too much. In the meantime, have a nice couple of weeks off. Enjoy Columbus Day, and see you all of you back in action, so to speak, on Monday, October 17th.
17th.
Yeah.
And let's hope things improve.
That's a very nice way to finish our. I won't add anything to it, Barbara. That's the way it should be. That being said, we'll see.
Okay.
All right.
Happy New Year.
Thank you, everybody, and see you all on the 17th.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everybody. Bye-bye.
Happy New
Bye-bye.
Year.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.